Last time we spoke about the Guominjun-Fengtian War, part of the Anti-Fengtian War. Sun Chuanfeng had risen through the ranks and he quickly seized himself a power base in southeast China. Zhang Zuolin and his Fengtian commanders meanwhile became quite arrogant and began bullying and seizing as much territory as they could. This led the Fengtian forces to begin encroaching into Sun Chuanfeng's newfound territory of Zhujiang. Assuming Sun Chuanfeng, like the rest, would not resist them, they were certainly surprised when he did. Sun Chuanfeng formed a coalition with the warlords that controlled Jiangsu, Fujian, Jiangxi, Anhui, and his own Zhejiang provinces, to fight off the Fengtian menace. Sun Chuanfeng went straight onto the offensive, surprising the Fengtian, who were in a passive phase, and ultimately defeating them, pushing them further north to Shandong. Sun Chuanfeng's victory in the Guominjun-Fengtian War marked the peak of his career, but peaks tend to fall. This episode is the Anti-Fengtian War Part 2, the Guominjun-Fengtian War. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, over at YouTube and on all podcast platforms. I'm currently releasing quite a lot of podcasts on various subjects touching upon the history of Japan and China and World War II. The two latest podcasts will be on underrated moments of the Pacific War and that of World War II in Europe. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. There's actually a poll going up right at this very moment about what will be the next exclusive podcast episode. The majority of votes are sitting upon an episode on Unit 731, which will be really graphic. So if that's something you're into, come check it out. In the previous episode, we spoke about the Guominjun-Fengtian War. It was part of a larger war known loosely as the Anti-Fengtian War or the Third Guominjun-Fengtian War. To be blunt, if you look up the Anti-Fengtian War, they barely take notice of the Guominjun-Fengtian War. Most of the focus is directed north, particularly with the conflict between the Guominjun and the Fengtian. Certainly the Guominjun took the spotlight during this war, as Feng Yusong and Zhang Zuolin were clearly fighting for dominance over Beijing. However, Zhang Zuolin was simply too powerful and he began to bully his way across China. Through Duan Qire and his Beiyang government, Zhang Zuolin secured vital positions for his subordinates. The 5th Fengtian Army commander, Kan Chaosi, was ordered to take 2 Fengtian mixed brigades and occupy Ruhe province as its governor. Li Jingling, the commander of the Fengtian 2nd Army, and a Hubei native, became the military inspector of Hubei. The dog-meat general, Zhang Zongzhang, was given the title of commander-in-chief of suppressing banditry in Jiangsu, Shandong, and Anhui, which further led him to become the governor of Shandong province. Yang Yuting was made governor over Jiangsu, and Jiang Dangshen became the governor over Anhui. By 1925, the Fengtian military was now 370,000 men strong across land, sea, and air. By January of 1925, Fengtian forces began occupying Shanghai, threatening Sun Chuanfeng, who unleashed the Guominjun-Fengtian War in retaliation. As for Feng Yusong, he was unable to exert any real control in Beijing. He had received the title of Inspector General over the Northwest, effectively a military governorship. This saw him gain control over Ruhe, Chahar, and Suyan. In early 1925, he moved his headquarters to Kalgan. Through his subordinates and his allies, he exerted control over Hunan, Shanxi, and Gansu. Because of his recent acquisition of Soviet aid, his armies were growing in size, though declining in quality. He had gradually distanced himself from Zhang Zuolin. In January of 1925, Feng Yusong was being excluded by Duan Qire and Zhang Zuolin. At this point, Feng Yusung met with Li Dajiao, as Soviet military advisors were coming to help train his forces. In the late spring and summer, Feng Yusung dispatched young officers to study in the Soviet Union. After a very strict examination period, presided over by Feng Yusung, 24 of his 300 students were enlisted into the Soviet Officer Training Corps. Another 24 would be sent to Japan. When the May 13th incident broke out, Feng Yusung, alongside some subordinates, sent a telegram to Duan Qire asking the Beiyang government to, quote, "Take the external situation seriously, and not to worry about it," and expressed his willingness to go to the front for the country. Feng Yusung then began supporting student demonstrations and on June 13th had all of his troops wear black armbands to mourn the Shanghai martyrs. Feng Yusung also pushed his men to donate to the Shanghai strike workers and personally donated 10,000 yuan. Now Feng Yusung watched closely the events unfolding in the southeast. Upon discovering Sun Chuanfeng was gaining the upper hand, Feng Yusung finally made his move. He began secretly extending his hand to just about anyone who would join him to fight the Fengtian forces. Obviously, Sun Chuanfeng was immediately receptive. Feng Yusung then reached out within the Fengtian clique to see if there was any disgruntled commanders who would defect. He first began flirting with Li Jingling, the current governor of Hubei province. It seemed Li Jingling was completely on board for the time being as another Fengtian commander welcomed the invitation. Guo Songling, holding the courtesy name of Mao Qian, was born on December 25th of 1883 in Yuqiaozhai village of Dongling district in Liaoning province. In 1903, Guo Songling began studying under Mr. Dong Haru in Changwonjai. However, he was soon forced to pull out of school because of the outbreak of the Russo-Japanese War. In autumn of 1905, General Zhao Ershun established the Fengtian Army Primary School at Dabaiguan in Fengtian province. Guo Songling immediately joined up. The next year he met Fang Shengtao, a member of the Tongmenghui, where he would become exposed to revolutionary ideology. In 1907, Guo Songling graduated with honors, and he soon served as a sentry to the Shangjiang General's office. He was then taken under the wing of Commander Zhu Qinglan. In 1909, Guo Songling was transferred to Chengdu of Sichuan province alongside Zhu Qinglan. The next year, Guo Songling joined the Nationalist Army of the Tongmenghui, joining their party as well. In 1911, the Sichuan Railway Protection Movement broke out, and Guo Songling joined the uprising. It is at this point I've just realized that my parrots upstairs are screaming so loud that the mic here in my closet is picking it up, and I do apologize. Much like any of you who owns dogs who bark at the mailman or cars going by, my parrots do the same, and it's quite annoying. I usually wake up literally at 5 o'clock in the morning while the parrots are asleep to record these, but unfortunately I just had my first kid and now my sleeping schedule is non-existent. Anyways, by this point he was promoted to commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 68th Regiment, responsible for the defense of northern Chengdu. He persuaded the masses to lift the siege without any bloodshed. The governor of Sichuan province, Zhao Erfang, dismissed Guo Songling suspecting him to be colluding with bandits, but later restored him to his original post at the request of Zhu Qinglan. After the Wuchang Uprising, various regions of Sichuan declared independence one after another. In Chengdu, a new government formed with Zhu Qinglan as deputy governor. However, Sichuan generals soon instigated local troops to launch a mutiny, forcing Zhu Qinglan and many Hakka generals to flee Sichuan province. Guo Songling then decided to return to Fengtian province. While back in Fengtian province, he joined another uprising movement led by Zhang Rong. However, Zhang Rong was quickly arrested by the Qing government and beheaded. At this point, one Han Chushou risked her life trying to stop the carriage carrying Zhang Rong to his execution. She was caught, but before they seized her, she told the police she was the fiancée of Guo Songling, and this led them to let her go. She married Guo Songling shortly after. In 1912, Guo Songling entered the Beijing Officers Institute, and the next year he entered the Army University. After graduating, he served as a Beijing Military Academy instructor. In 1917, after Sun Yat-sen established his military government in Guangzhou, Guo Songling joined up as a chief of staff to the Guangdong, Jiangxing, Hunan border defense, and he became the battalion commander of the Guangdong Provincial Army. After Sun Yat-sen saw some major defeats, Guo Songling departed Guangzhou, yet again returning to Fengtian, where he would take up a position as a tactical instructor for the military academy of Manchuria. It was here he met Zhang Zuolin. Zhang Zuolin soon recommended him to his dad, who made him chief of staff and the head of the 2nd Regiment. By 1921, he was the head of the 8th Brigade. During the First Zhuli-Fengtian War of 1922, the Eastern Route force led by Zhang Zuolin and Guo Songling shattered Wu Peifu's plan to break through Shananguan. During the Second Zhuli-Fengtian War of 1924, Zhang Zuolin and Guo Songling were serving as commander and deputy commander of the Third Army. Alongside Jiang Dongquan and Han Linchun, commanding the First Army, they soundly defeated the Zhuli forces, winning the war. Zhang Zuolin then appointed his son as commander of the Beijing Yulin garrison, with Guo Songling as his deputy commander. As Zhang Zuolin dispatched Fengtian commanders into China proper to occupy southern provinces, Guo Songling believed Zhang Zuolin and many of his commanders were becoming warmongers, and he proposed a different strategy, emphasizing pulling back forces into China's interior to try and win over the rural populations. Other commanders worked to politically exclude Guo Songling from Zhang Zuolin's ear, such as Yang Yuqing. Thus, Guo Songling's proposal was rejected. In 1925, Guo Songling took his wife to Japan to study military affairs. While in Japan, Guo Songling learned Zhang Zuolin was dispatching his troops south, drawing Sun Chuanfeng into a war. He also learned the extent of Zhang Zuolin's dealings with the Japanese. He became disgusted with how he was seemingly selling out China. Now, Guo Songling's wife, Han Shusho, was a graduate of the Yuqing University and a classmate of Feng Yusung's wife, Li Duchuan. They had a good relationship, and they were close contacts. Han Shusho learned about Feng Yusung's dealings with the Soviets and told Guo Songling, who became quite excited. Guo Songling had acquired quite a few grievances under Zhang Zuolin, and he wanted to overthrow him. Therefore, he began secretly negotiating with Feng Yusung. In November, Guo Songling was recalled to China for the war effort. Yet, instead of aiding the war effort, on November the 22nd, Guo Songling raised an army in Luanzhou. He sent a telegram stating he was rebelling against Zhang Zuolin. He called his new force the Northeast National Army. Zhang Dengsheng rushed over to Lianzhou Station to try and reason with Guo Songling, but he was arrested upon entering the city. Guo Songling tried to persuade Zhang Dengsheng to join him to oppose Zhang Zuolin, but Zhang simply scolded him. Guo Songling then had him shot on November the 26th. Guo Songling had raised 70,000 troops who quickly captured Shananguan. In the face of the onslaught, Zhang Zuolin only had about 40,000 troops in the vicinity, as he had dispatched the vast majority of his forces into China proper to expand the Fengtian Empire. Thus, it's pretty ironic the guy who told him to pull back his forces into the interior was now attacking his interior. Guo Songling's forces brushed aside the Fengtian armies, seizing Suzhou, Xicheng, and Jinzhou. The Fengtian forces were taken completely off guard, and they were quickly pushed towards the east bank of the Liaohua River. Guo Songling's main target was to be Mukden, which he soon erected a siege against. Guo Songling, since November the 22nd, began repeatedly sending telegrams to Zhang Zuolin, demanding he step down and allow his son, Zhang Zuolin, to take over. If Zhang Zuolin would simply do so, he promised to stop his rebellion. Zhang Zuolin panicked and he began frantically placing a bounty over Guo Songling's head, about 800,000 yuan's worth. With no one to turn to, Zhang Zuolin ran with his tail between his legs to the Japanese, asking if their Guangdong army could stop Guo Songling. Zhang Zuolin knew very well the kind of man Guo Songling was. He knew the man's personality and vigor was a huge threat politically. Allegedly, Zhang Zuolin began the process of forming his resignation and peace talks. Zhang Zuolin was seen packing 29 cars with his furniture and his valuables heading over to Dalian to flee, most likely for Japan. It is also alleged he had a ton of firewood and gasoline positioned around his mansion, so it can be burned down if Guo Songling tried to capture it. Countless Fengtian civilian and military officials also began fleeing with their families. It was pure chaos. The Japanese were certainly not pleased with the situation. The Guangdong army certainly did not want Guo Songling to gain power. It most certainly would spell doom over their dominance over Manchuria. Guo Songling was in league with Feng Yusung, and to the Japanese this meant, one way or another, he was a communist sympathizer. The Japanese view of Guo Songling was, quote, Guo Songling's intention was to expel Zhang Zuolin himself, clearly implement the three principles of the Guomingtang, involve the three northeastern provinces in war, attract the Soviet forces into Manchuria, and induce a situation that Japan's national defense and Manchuria-Mongolian policy could not forgive. The president of the Manchuria Railway Company, Yoshiro Banichiro, believed, if Guo Songling's rebellion was successful, the three northeastern provinces would be ravaged by the communist movement, and there might be a free zone without the Manchurian Railway and Kwangtung Li's territory. Consul General Yoshida Shigeru in Tianjin reported that if Guo Songling took over Manchuria, it was sure the Kuomintang would move in and the threat of communism would come with them. Thus, the Japanese believed that Zhang Zuolin needed to stay in power. The Japanese began mediating a peace deal, highlighting how they wished both sides would recognize their empire's rights in Manchuria and Mongolia. They also added if these demands were not respected, they would go to war with either of them. Guo Songling slammed the table to this and he shouted, "How can this be? This is China's internal affairs. I don't understand what Japan's special rights even are." Then Zhang Zuolin made a secret agreement with the Japanese, caving into all of their demands if the Kwangtung army would send troops to help him out. On December the 8th, the Kwangtung army issued a warning to Guo Songling to stay 20 miles away from the South Manchurian Railway concession, or they would get involved. The Kwangtung army was taking measures to halt Guo Songling's advance and to give Zhang Zuolin time to get his forces over. On the 9th, the Japanese 10th Divisional HQ moved from Liaoyang to Fengtian. The 63rd Regiment, 1st Artillery Battalion, and the 1st Cavalry Battalion of Gongchuling, alongside garrison units, all converged upon Fengtian to try and intercept Guo Songling. On the 12th, Guo Songling's vanguard arrived near Baoqibao. His right wing prepared an assault against Yingkou. On the 14th, they tried to enter Yingkou, and they were suddenly blocked by Japanese forces and issued another warning to back off. Guo Songling's men were thus banned from the urban area, forced to take the fighting along the Laohu River. This was a huge obstacle between them and Fengtian. It meant they would have to go 30 kilometers around the South Manchurian Railway to get to it. On the 15th, the Japanese decided to withdraw part of the IJ 24th Division from Korea and part of the 12th Division from Kurume to form a Manchuria Expeditionary Army that would be deployed in Fengtian to stop Guo Songling. On the 17th, the main bulk of Guo Songling's army entered Baoqibao. On the 20th, Guo Songling captured Ximin, and his vanguard was now arriving near the west bank of the Zhuliu River, due southwest of Mukden. Guo Songling's men could see the lights of the Fengtian cities as they awaited the rest of the army to ford the river. The next day, the main force arrived in Ximin, setting up a new HQ. The Fengtian defenses were led by Zhang Zuolin, who deployed along the eastern bank of the Zhuliu River, from Danmintun to Guangjutun. Wu Jiasheng's 6th Army, consisting mostly of cavalry, were rushing south from Heiliangjiang province to take up a position on the Fengtian left wing, while Zhang Zuojiang's 5th Army was coming over from Jilin to take over the right wing. Zhang Zuolin personally led the 3rd Army within the middle. Guo Songling set up his men along the western bank of the Zhuliu River, arranging them from north to south in the order of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Armies. On the 22nd, Guo Songling gave the order for a general attack to take place the next day. The next day, his army launched their attack against Zhang Zuolin's middle position, finding he was utilizing heavy Japanese weaponry. Zhang Zuoling's attack with his right wing quickly occupied Beigao Daizu before hooking around to cut off Guo Songling's line of retreat. Then Wu Zhencheng's left wing seized Luihugou and assaulted Baoqibao, where he burned Guo Songling's ammunition dumps, weaponry, and provisions. Now Guo Songling's supply line was compromised and his rear was threatened. At this point, Zhang Zuolin went out of his way to dispatch air forces to drop letters trying to get his former friend to stop the rebellion. Without any response from Guo Songling, Zhang Zuolin took his force and began surrounding his army. That night, Guo Songling held a meeting with his generals, Zhou Zouhua and Gao Jiyi, who advocated for a ceasefire and peace talks. Other generals like Liao Wei and Fan Pujiang advocated to keep the fighting going on. In the end, Guo Songling elected to keep the war going, and he decided to engage in a decisive battle on the 24th. On the 24th, Guo Songling personally led the battle, launching 3 fierce attacks against the Fengtian forces. However, Zhou Zouhua, his chief of staff, defected, withdrawing an artillery brigade as he did so, greatly hampering the war effort. Guo Songling's army was defeated. He gave permission to his subordinates, even his personal guards, to try and escape if they could during the night. Guo Songling and his wife Han Shushu were both captured by Wang Yongqing, the brigade commander of Wu Zhensheng's army. They were then taken to Mukden for trial. On December the 25th, Wang Yongqing was escorting them when he received orders issued by Yang Yuting, Guo Songling's political rival. The orders were simply to shoot them on the spot. Now, depending who you hear the story from, many would claim it was actually Zhang Zuolin who sent the order. Historians believe Yang Yuting was worried Zhang Zuolin would rescue Guo Songling, so he advised Zhang Zuolin it was best to simply kill him, so that the ordeal would not be repeated. At about 10 a.m., Guo Songling and his wife were shot near Liaodafang in Liaozhong County. Their bodies were transported to Mukden, which I should be calling Shenyang technically. I do apologize, the names of a lot of these places changes back and forth, and I have a bad habit of just simply calling a place like, let's say, Beijing instead of Beiping or Peking, etc. Honestly, I just figured it would kind of confuse the audience. Regardless, their bodies were left to be exposed in the Xiaoheian Stadium for over 3 days. Thus ended the month-long rebellion of Guo Songling. Now, while all of this was breaking out in Manchuria, Feng Yusung had unleashed his own little war as well. In early December, Feng Yusung led the Guominjun forces east, launching a massive attack into Ruhe province. Now, if you recall, Feng Yusung had brokered a deal with Li Jingling, and these parts of Ruhe happened to be his territory. Thus, Li Jingling saw this as quite the betrayal. He sent a telegram denouncing Feng Yusung. He fooled his subordinates and used the heresy of communism to destroy the great defense and morality. I carry the sword for the country, not for party disputes or for profit, but only for this humanitarianism, in order to destroy the public enemy of the world and save our morality from the decline of 5,000 years. It doesn't matter whether we are enemies or not, but only whether we are red or not. Li Jingling fought tenaciously against the Guominjun. However, by December the 23rd, Feng Yusung had seized Tianjin. Meanwhile, alongside Sun Chuanfeng, Wu Peifu had also joined the Zhuli fight against the Fengtian forces. Thus, he was loosely allied to Feng Yusung. Yes, the Jade Marshal had come back. When Guo Songling's rebellion had crumbled, it seemed clear to all that Feng Yusung was about to face the full brunt of Zhang Zuolin's Fengtian armies, who had withdrawn into the interior to meet this threat. While Feng Yusung dominated the Beijing area, it was only a matter of time before the Fengtian swarmed him. Wu Peifu had been quietly building up his power base in Hunan. While he appeared to be a great ally to the anti-Fengtian cause, he was anything but. The only person Wu Peifu hated more than Zhang Zuolin was, of course, Feng Yusung, the man who had stabbed him in the back and ruined his Zhuli-dominated China dream. If Wu Peifu were to join Zhang Zuolin, they would effectively surround and isolate Feng Yusung's pocket in the north. Wu Peifu knew if he wanted to rejoin the Big Boys Club again, he would have to kowtow to Zhang Zuolin and take up a subordinate position. If, let's say, Wu Peifu and Zhang Zuolin dominated Beijing again, they would be able to squeeze any funding away from Feng Yusung, shoving him back into the northwest, whence they could gradually beat him the hell up. Thus, Wu Peifu and Zhang Zuolin settled their differences and they formed an alliance against the treacherous Feng Yusung. It's kind of funny, but Feng Yusung had betrayed both men at some point, so it was sort of a binding glue to their newfound relationship. The Zhuli and Fengtian cliques had united once again, this time calling themselves the Anti-Red Coalition. Their objective was quite simple. They would surround and strangle Feng Yusung's army. On January the 20th, Feng Yusung had launched a battle against their new coalition at Shanhaiguan, Shandong, and Hunan simultaneously. Zhang Zuolin led his army to occupy Luanzhou before advancing towards Tianjin. Zhang Songzhang, whose army had withdrawn into Shandong after Sun Chuanfeng had defeated them, now attacked from the south. Zhang Zuolin dispatched a special envoy to officially form an alliance with Wu Peifu, asking him to attack Feng Yusung from his position and if possible see if Yan Xishan wanted a piece of the action. Honestly, you have to love Yan Xishan. The guy turtled up almost the entire warlord era, and only when there was a perfect opportunity with no risk at all, he would come out and he would attack. We've all played the game of Risk. He was one of those guys. That friend you have that's just hiding in, Australia. Yeah, he's that guy. Wu Peifu took his rather meager forces and marched north from Hubei into Hunan. His relatively weak army was assisted by the Red Spear Society. Which is kind of ironic. The Red Spears are attacking the Red Communists. The Red Spears, of course, were a rural self-defense movement that sprang up in Hubei, Hunan, and Shandong in the 1920s. They were small local landowners and tenant farmers trying to defend their land or villages from roaming bandits, warlords, and tax collectors. And later on in history, the communists and Japanese, it seems. In many ways, they were the spiritual successor to the Big Sword Society. This particular group of them had been abused by a Guominjun commander named Yue Weichun, who presided over Hunan. Back in the north, an incident broke out at the Daku forts. Feng Yusung, having taken control of Tianjin and the Daku forts, seized some minor warships and he began mining the sea area. This was in violation of the Boxer Protocol, and the Imperial Japanese Navy retaliated by bombarding his ships and even fired upon Feng Yusung's forces along the coast. Feng Yusung had his artillery fire back upon the Imperial Japanese warships. In the face of the escalating situation, other foreign powers notified China they must stop what they were doing, i.e. stop Feng Yusung, or this would threaten to breach the Boxer Protocol, and they might very well attack China again. An ultimatum was given, prompting Duan Qirei to persuade Feng Yusung to stop mining the water. Then on March the 18th of 1926, KMT and CCP members such as Shi Qian, Li Dazhao, Zhao Xiyan, and some others initiated a national congress against the eight-power ultimatum in front of Tiananmen Square, with Shi Qian serving as a chairman over the presidium of the congress. Mass demonstrations broke out in Tiananmen Square as large crowds called for an end to the unequal treaties, for foreign warships to depart their waters, and for Feng Yusung to fight their imperial aggression. Li Dazhao took to the stage shouting, "Don't be afraid, they dare not do anything to us." Li Dazhao then led many to rush towards the state council. Duan Qirei panicked and he ordered the Beijing guards to fire upon them, and a reporter at the scene stated that the marchers, quote, "The demonstrators attacked the state council, poured oil, threw bombs, and attacked the military and police with pistols and sticks. The military and police were killed and injured in their legitimate defense." 47 demonstrators were killed, 150 more were wounded. Duan Qirei then ordered the arrest of the ringleaders such as Li Dazhao and Shi Qian, who all fled. Now back over in the war in the north, Guominjun commander Lu Zhongling now faced an offensive from Li Jingling and Zhang Songchang from Shandong and the main Fengtian forces coming from Manchuria. Li Jingling began his advance in February of 1926, fighting Lu Zhongling for several weeks. Feng Yusung realized they were going to lose the war at this rate, so he ordered the forces to pull out of Hubei and Henan into the Beijing area. Lu Zhongling was forced to evacuate 100,000 men by March 21st. Feng Yusung took positions in the Beijing area where they would fight off the enemy for over a month, the enemy now including Wu Peifu, who had just advanced from Hunan. Feng Yusung meanwhile arrested Duan Qirei and he released Tao Kun on April 9th, trying to sow some dissent between Wu Peifu and Zhang Zuolin. His idea was to declare he was once again willing to serve under Tao Kun, and he sent word to Wu Peifu that they should join forces to destroy the Fengtian clique. Wu Peifu simply ignored this request. Lu Zhongling, leading the forces from the front, knew he could not hope to hold back the onslaught any longer, so on April the 15th, he evacuated the army to the Nankou Pass, roughly 30 miles northwest of Beijing. In the meantime, the coalition led by the armies under Zhang Songchang, Jiang Shuliang, Li Jingling, and Wu Peifu occupied Beijing. They installed Yan Huqing as a temporary figurehead as Duan Qirei was exiled to Tianjin under orders from Zhang Zuolin. The coalition forces also sacked Beijing so badly it would not recover until 1928. Now at the Nankou Pass, 90,000 Guominjun troops resisted the onslaught of over 450,000 of the enemy until August the 16th. The Guominjun, looking for another escape route, dispatched a force led by Shi Yusan and Han Fuzhu into Shanxi. They would be attacked near Deitong by Yan Xishan's army. Despite being sympathetic to the Guominjun, as Yan Xishan was loosely associated to the KMT, his policy of neutrality had to be enforced. It was, after all, one of the ways he managed to survive this long. Feng Yusung's forces were quickly dislodged from Shanxi. Meanwhile, Chaha fell to Zhang Shilang's men as they advanced from Beijing, and Xuyuan province fell to Yan Xishan as his men advanced from Shanxi. The Guominjun put up a Spartan-like resistance, but the Fengtian brought Japanese heavy artillery to the Nankou Pass, where they blew away possibly 10,000 Guominjun soldiers. The Guominjun were forced to retreat into Gansu province by August 15th. Gansu at this time was being held by a bunch of lesser warlords whose domains were affected by religious divisions. Feng Yusung now took this time to go on a trip to the Soviet Union, announcing his resignation. Yet, as was always the case with every warlord who announced he was retiring, it wasn't a retirement. Feng Yusung went to the USSR, where he began regaining control over his Guominjun army, winning back favor with two of his best generals who had defected, those being Han Fuchu and Shi Yusan. Both these men had tossed their lot in with Yan Xishan temporarily. Feng Yusung's next goal was to recover his position in Shaanxi, where his forces had been under siege since April of 1926, by forces led by Liao Chenhua, the previous warlord of Shaanxi. Liao Chenhua had been bolstered by the Red Spear units from Funan. Now Feng Yusung had basically united all the northern warlords in their hatred for him, so he pretty much had no one else to look to, except, of course, for the Guomingtang. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, over at YouTube and on all podcast platforms. I'm about to release a very long podcast series on the North African campaign. Also, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month you get access to my exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for what I will tackle next. There is currently a poll for the next exclusive podcast, and it looks like it's going to be an episode on Unit 731. It's going to be very graphic and unsettling, so if you're interested in some horror-like content, come over and check it out. Feng Yusung unleashed his Guominjun after securing many sneaky deals with those like Guo Songling, Sun Chuanfeng, Li Jingling, and even Wu Peifu, sort of. His plans all came to naught, as he gradually lost the Anti-Fengtian War, and now Wu Peifu and Zhang Zuolin were back in Beijing together. Talk about deja vu.